Please note this video is meant to be a reference only and not a detailed instructional video. There are a large amount of details that you will not see in this video that should be described to you by an instructor. Escapes require a lot of timing, details, patience, and more. Also be aware that these escapes work for specific situations and not all escapes fit all scenarios. Having a good arsenal is very important. Part 3 of this series shows mount escapes and back mount escapes. I hope you enjoy. One of the most common escapes from the mount is the elbow knee escape. It's very important that you start with one leg flat so your opponent doesn't get his legs underneath your legs. When you're doing this, you shrimp to one side, push their leg, and then shrimp to the other side as you get your legs out. Also, when you're doing this, it's very helpful to drag your opponent's leg across and into the center. So if you see here, I reach across with my one leg, drag his foot through so I get it in the middle, I shrimp to both sides, and then I escape to guard. Also, when you do the elbow knee escape, if your opponent is sticking his leg really hard and flat into the mat, you can then stick your toes underneath his foot and lift his leg up and drag it into the center, so in that way it makes the escape easier as well. Sometimes when your opponent does this, he does it because he knows you're going to try to drag his leg across. But when he does bring his leg heavy to the mat, it makes it easier for you to be able to lift his leg so you can escape that way. With a bumping escape from the mount, you want to bump your opponent's head towards the mat so they post their hands on the mat, trap their arm, pull it in, bridge up, bridge their head, make their head go towards the mat as you push them with your hand. Now when you push them with your other hand, I like pushing into their armpit because I feel like it gives me more leverage and power rather than pushing into their hips or their ribs. And if your opponent is extremely high into your armpits, this is the one moment where you have the ability to possibly almost do a back roll on your opponent, stick your foot into your opponent's armpit as you also get control of their sleeve, and then you extend your legs and roll them towards the side of the arm that you have control of. So here, I bring my legs way over, I put my foot in my opponent's armpit, pull his sleeve, and then roll him over. There may be moments where your opponent doesn't feel that heavy on you, so you have the ability to put your hands very low on their hips, pop him up, get space, and then from there you can lift your opponent up. Now when I do this, I also make sure I bring my elbows inside because it makes it easier for me to lift my opponent's hips up, and then I usually get to the butterfly guard or some other type of open guard, or I could possibly attack for leg locks. Another tricky escape is when you are able to bump your opponent forward, which lifts their hips up a little bit. And when you do this, you get both your arms underneath your opponent's one leg, and then you start doing a reverse shrimp and scooting him over you so in that way you can come out the back door. So if you watch here, I bump my opponent forward, get a little bit of space, I start prying both my arms underneath his one leg, and as I do this, I then scoot my body out and come out from behind him, so in that way I can also attack him as well. I do the best I can to time my opponent's movement to the S-mount position, so then this way I may have the ability to get my elbow underneath their leg, and when I do this, I can then push their leg away, get some space, and then I get my bottom shin underneath their leg, which gives me the ability to escape. So when he goes to switch, I see him doing this. I get to my side, I bring my elbow very close to my hip, which gets underneath his leg, and then that way I can get my leg under his leg and I can escape. Another thing that I try to do when he already has the S-mount is I try to bump him forward, and I do this by usually grabbing his collar, and then when his hips come up a little bit, I take my top leg, I bring it underneath, and this gives me the ability to do the shin sweep on him. So if you see, my right hand is actually holding his collar when I bump him towards me, which gives me the ability to lift him up even more. Then I get my top leg underneath his leg, and then I start working the shin sweep, so in that way I can escape and also get on top. And also when my opponent has the S-mount position, if I'm able to bump him forward and get some space, I then also try to take both my arms, bring them underneath his leg, so then that way I can come out the back door. If I have the ability to do this, this is actually easier than doing it if he had the full mount, because when I lift him and I get my arms underneath, his weight is a little bit lighter on me and have the ability to come out even faster on him. So I get both my arms under, and then I turn, and then I can actually start attacking him. A very common back mount escape is when you tip to your side, usually the direction where your opponent's choking arm is facing, and then you do a shoulder walk backwards. So in that way you can get your shoulders to the mat. He starts losing his upper body control, and when he starts losing his upper body control, you then have the ability to start pushing his legs and twisting your hips, so in that way you can escape. So if you watch from here, I tip to the side, and then after I tip to the side, I start walking my shoulders towards the mat. And once my hips get loose, I can then work to escape. Another thing that I do, which is a little bit different, is instead of tipping all the way to my side, I arch backwards and I put some pressure on my opponent. I make sure I put my head on the side that I want to go to, and then I start twisting my hips into his leg. Once I feel like he doesn't have as much control, I can then use my hands and my feet to release his hooks. So if you see, I come back, I'm pretty much laying completely on top of him, and then I put my head on one side, and then while I'm on that side, my hand that's on the same side pulls his leg off, and then I use my foot to hook underneath his foot and clear his other hook out. And another option is to lay all the way back on top of your opponent, and then if his elbow isn't down very tight or if he doesn't have strong arm positioning, bring his arm to the other side of your head, and then from there start walking your body out and quickly turn into him. Now notice when I'm quickly turning into him, I switch my hands, so then that way I can push his arm across his body as I get to pretty much his guard. So when I escape this position, I'm escaping and I'm getting inside my opponent's guard, which is better than him having my back. Now, a common thing that I do to help release my opponent's body lock from my back is I tip to the same side that his legs are linked together, and then I start turning my hips extremely hard into his ankles, and usually this puts a lot of pressure and makes his ankles hurt. Lots of times your opponent will just let go, and then you'll have to do your other back mount escapes. But then you have moments where your opponent's leg will get trapped, and as it's trapped, you have the ability to walk right over their leg, and then you can escape and maybe even get on top. It's very helpful if you tip to the side that his legs are linked together. Now, if your opponent has his hooks in, but he doesn't have upper body control and you're facing downward, pop your hips up, make him plant his hands on the mat, and his head will be over you. And if you have the ability to grab his head, you can then turn him over. So what I'm doing here is I bump him forward, I crawl forward as I grab his head, and when I grab his head, I keep pulling it in, which makes him actually roll over me. And then from there, I just pull my body up, so then that way he doesn't get me an inverted guard or attack me. Another thing that you can do when your opponent has the back mount and you're pretty much belly down is you can do a mule kick as you swipe his leg away, so you can get one of his legs in the middle and then you quickly turn your hip down. So I'm down on all fours, I do a mule kick backwards, I swipe his leg with my arm, I bring my leg in back, and then I roll onto my hip, so that way I get the half guard. And another option, if I'm able to make my opponent plant his hands on the mat, is to get my head on one side or the outside of his arm, so then that way I can pull his arm in, and then I can start driving into him and then turn, so then that way I can get inside his guard. So what I do here is I bump him forward. I want to do this before he actually gets a very strong harness grip on me or upper body control on me, because if he gets strong upper body control on me, then this is going to be harder to do. But I bring my head to one side, I start tipping him, and then I run my body into him, so in that way I can escape, and then I'll end up inside his guard. Now, if you get caught flat on your stomach when your opponent has your back, this can be very hard to deal with. So one thing that I like to do is I stay low, and when I stay low, I post my hand out, I get my head out on the same side, and then I start turning my hips, and I keep my hip very low to the mat, and I start running my bottom leg out. Now, it's important that you do not try to come up to your knees, because if you try to come up to your knees, you're going to put pressure on your back and you're going to use a lot more energy. So if you notice, I post my hand out, I get my head out on the same side, I twist my hips down, and then I start running my bottom leg underneath, so in that way I can turn into my opponent and then end up in the half guard position. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to see the other parts of this series. Stay tuned at www.grapplersguide.com or www.grapplingescapes.com.